Hello chap here, welcome to the workshops. Today I would like to tell you the tale of three Chassepots. Well, two really, and well actually only one of any real historical significance. So the Chassepot itself is pretty well known, but perhaps what is less known is that there are in fact two distinctive production patterns of the rifle. The one I used so far for my vids and shooting is this one here, is the more common second pattern, and I have recently acquired this one here, which is actually the first pattern, so I would like to point out the few differences between the two. Production started for good at the National Arsenals from April 1867, with each arsenal receiving its specific lettered batch codes. Now, this one lacks the typical receiver marking with the imperial manufacturer and model number on it, but going from the acceptance mark on the stock and the serial number and the proof marks, it is clearly a Saint-Étienne produced rifle that came out in October of 1867. It's known that Saint-Étienne produced about 70,000 rifles in the first year of production, so the 32,000 odd serial number that we have on here, it fits well with coming out in October. Now, the lack of receiver marking on there is not really surprising, since the specific requirement to do so only came out in September of 1867, and then it seems to have been implemented sporadically until 1868. So it's not uncommon to find them without a receiver marking for the first year. The three features that identify a 100% first pattern rifle are firstly this checkered surface here on the slightly flattened back portion of the bolt handle. Then we have this notch here at the back of the cocking piece. And lastly, we have a straight tapered shape to the breech tang. By contrast, the second pattern has a completely round cocking handle. There's no longer a notch here at the back of the cocking piece, and we now have a stepped profile to the breech tang. Now, the funny notch at the back of the cocking piece isn't purely decorative, since actually it means you can prop the bolt firmly on an edge somewhere, and then you can have good purchase to pull the mainspring back and disengage the needle holder. The two nice to have features on the bolt were simply eliminated to simplify manufacturing. I have seen it quoted a few times that the removal of the checkering was due to complaints from the soldiers who were getting sore thumbs, but I kind of find that hard to believe. And the breech tang, however, that was modified for a more serious reason, since it was discovered after extensive firing that it caused the stress concentration at the tip there and on the screw underneath. And over time, that would cause cracks to form in the stock. So the new stepped shape, of course, spreads out the load across a large area, and you don't get that problem anymore. Now, the changes didn't really occur overnight, so it's possible to have transitional models which have some of the features, but not all of them. So the rough timeline for what was implemented when was the bolt handle. That was late 1867, early 68. The cocking piece here was simplified from August 86. And finally, the breech tang was modified late in 1869 and early 1870. Now, another interesting marking that is on the barrel is the AF, which stands for acier fondu, or cast steel. The barrel blanks were provided by external foundries, and at the time there was no specific way of tracing who made what. And after a few incidents of barrels bursting, they quickly came to the conclusion that traceability would be a very good thing. So foundries were then allocated letter codes, which then you could trace dodgy batches or sloppy manufacturers. So this one is before that happened. So that's it really, but not quite. You should know better. It's not over yet, because there is a second marking which is particularly interesting to me. There is a number 38 on the butt plate, and that makes it a rifle that was allocated to the 38th Line Infantry Regiment. Now, unit markings on rifles of this era are relatively rare, so that's great in itself to have a unit marked rifle, but the 38th Line Infantry is particularly interesting to me sitting here in Switzerland. Why? Well, we have to go back to 1870 for that. So when war were declared with Prussia in July of 1870, the 38th Regiment was garrisoning in Algeria. So it was spread all over the place. And as the war progressed, they were recalled and they shipped back to France in early October. There, they were incorporated into the 15th Army Corps of the Loire Army. Now, this army was intended to counterattack the Prussian advance and hopefully also lift the siege of Paris. So the regiment fights at Coulmiers, Loigny, Orléans, and in December of 1870, the 15th Corps is detached to join the Eastern Army under General Bourbaki, with a view to going round and destroying the Prussian supply lines. Now, at the mention of Bourbaki, I hope at least some of you might guess where I'm going with this. Yes, the infamous Bourbaki army. Now, I've told the story of the Bourbaki retreat in the Remote Military March video of 2023, so head over there, or maybe I'll link it at the end of this vid, if you want an unabridged version of what happened. But in short, the Eastern Army actually started quite well in the campaign, but unfortunately the Loire Army that was supposed to occupy the Prussians was defeated, which allowed the Prussians, of course, to reallocate resources and start chasing the Eastern Army. They find themselves in an extremely desperate retreat along the Swiss border, and the only option they have is humiliating surrender or negotiate with the Swiss for the army to be interned until signing of the full peace treaty. An agreement was signed on the 1st of February 1871, stipulating that all equipment would be handed over at the border, and that would be returned at the end of confinement, and all of the expenses incurred would be reimbursed by the French government. So over 87,000 starving, freezing, and a lot of wounded men crossed the border, with the Swiss stockpiling the equipment as immortalized by the Bourbaki panorama, which was painted by Edouard Castres, which is now on display in Lucerne, which is worth a visit if you're passing. So the Swiss were under no illusions that the Prussians would attack if the French entered Switzerland in fighting order. Then they were in no position to repel an attack. So they were extremely meticulous in removing the equipment. The Swiss had mobilized at the start of the war, as both France and Prussia could have sought to cut through the Jura. But then as the conflict developed more into France, they demobbed because it was no longer necessary. So when the Eastern Army suddenly arrives at the border, it's really just a hastily assembled task force that's guarding the border. So there's no way they were going to repel the Prussians if they decided to march in. So all this to say is that the 38th Regiment crossed into Switzerland, handed over their Chassepots and all the other gear, and then they were sent off to be cared for until they could head home. They seem to have been interred in Hoorn, in Graubünden, since I discovered that there is actually a memorial there to the men of the 38th who died of wounds or illness during their internment in March 1871. So, since I bought this rifle here in Switzerland, it is highly probable that it was used in the war, crossed the border in February 1871, and for whatever reason, never made it back. So I think this one is genuinely going to stay nice and safe and snug on the rifle rack. So we've talked about the two rifles. The third one's disappeared. Well, it is right here. What we have is some kind of mystery, should I say, sporterized Chassepot short rifle carbine. Now, it was clearly initially a Type 1, or at least a transitional rifle, from the shape of the breech tang and also of the cocking piece here. But the receiver and barrel flats have been completely machined away, so it's now a sort of cylindrical profile. I suspect the barrel is actually a replacement. The bolt has undergone some nice decorative machining, and also the bolt handle has been turned down. The barrel length is 19.5 centimeters shorter than the rifle, but that doesn't match any of the shorter French service rifles. And the rear sight has been set further back, and also the stock has been properly modified so that the nose cap and middle barrel band are sort of proportional to the barrel length. Also, in a bid to increase ergonomics, we have a slightly crescented butt plate here, and the trigger is actually curved further back for a more natural position. Now, there are absolutely no markings on this thing, aside from tiny witness marks on the underside for aligning the barrel to the receiver. So, as to the when, why, and how, that'll be a complete mystery, but it clearly wasn't your average bubba in his shed. So, the result is actually a very handy carbine, and I can't wait to shoot it. So there we go. I hope you liked this little walk through the brief evolution of the Chassepot rifle with, of course, a little historical tangent as we always do. So thank you for watching. Thank you for your support, whatever platform you wish to follow us on. Don't forget we are also on the Weapons of War app, and shall see you very soon here or out on the range. Bye.